The courtroom was full, attorneys in pressed suits, a judge with reading glasses perched at the end of her nose, rows of spectators who had no real business being there but came anyway, drawn by the kind of quiet drama that small towns generate on slow Tuesdays. And then there was Jake Mercer. He sat at the defendant's table in a gray work shirt with a small oil stain just above the second button. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, calm, still. The kind of still that comes not from peace but from having nothing left to lose. He did not look like a billionaire. That was the problem. That was also, as it turned out, the point. 3 years before that Tuesday, Jake Mercer had been standing in his own driveway watching a moving truck back out into the street. It was a Thursday in October, the kind of morning where the sky is white and the air smells like wet leaves. He remembered that detail later, the wet leaves, because the smell became attached to the memory in a way he couldn't undo. Years later, October would still do something strange to his chest. The truck took the couch. It took the dining table, the lamp from the corner, the painting of the coast that he and Diane had bought at a street fair in 2016 for $60 and argued about hanging for 3 weeks before finally agreeing on the wall beside the stairs. It took the coffee maker. He had watched all of it with his arms crossed, not because he was angry, but because it was the only way he could keep his hands from shaking. Diane had gotten everything in the settlement: the house on Carver Street, the Audi, the savings account that had $41,000 in it the morning they signed the papers. The custody arrangement gave her primary residential care of their daughter, Lily, age 7, with Jake permitted supervised visits on alternating weekends. He had stood there and signed those papers. His attorney, a tired man named Howard who charged $280 an hour, had leaned over and said, "You could fight this, Jake." Jake had looked at him for a long moment and said nothing. Then he picked up the pen. What they left him? $200 in a checking account, a 2008 Ford F-150 with 160,000 miles and a crack in the windshield, and a red metal toolbox that had belonged to his father, dented on one corner from a fall off a workbench sometime in the late 90s. That was it. He moved into a garage on the edge of town on Ridgemont Avenue, a detached structure behind a vacant rental property managed by a property company that hadn't noticed the building was empty. He paid $300 a month in cash. The roof had one solid section and one questionable one. There was a single light bulb on a cord and a utility sink with cold water only. He set the toolbox against the wall. He sat on the floor. He stayed like that for a while. Then he got up and started working. The first supervised visit happened on a Saturday in November. He had driven 40 minutes to the Family Services office on Delwood Road, a beige building that always smelled of printer toner and old coffee. He sat in a waiting room with plastic chairs and a rack of pamphlets until a woman in a lanyard came and walked him down a hallway to a room with a low table and some toys in a bin. Lily came through the door with one sock sliding off her heel. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Hi, Bug," he said. She didn't say anything. She walked across the room and pressed herself into his side and didn't move for 2 full minutes. He could feel the top of her head against his ribs. He put his arm around her and stared at the wall and breathed. The visit was 90 minutes. They played cards. She beat him at Go Fish twice and was openly pleased about it, demanding a third game with the authority of someone who had found a competitive edge and intended to exploit it. When the woman in the lanyard came back to the door, Lily looked up at her, then back at Jake, then at the woman again. Her jaw set in a way that she had gotten from him. That exact angle, that exact resistance. "I have to go," Jake said. "I know," Lily said. He walked her to the door. He crouched down to her level and looked at her face. He said, "I'll see you in 2 weeks." 2 weeks, she repeated, like she was checking the math and didn't like the answer. He drove back to the garage. He sat in the truck for a while without getting out. Then he took out a notepad he kept in the glove compartment and wrote the date. He wrote it every visit. He had no clear reason why. It felt like evidence. The thing about Jake Mercer that the divorce settlement papers did not capture was this: he had a mind that did not stop. It had always been this way. He had done 2 years at Harfield Community College, left without graduating, and taught himself engineering through library books, YouTube videos, and a stack of electrical engineering textbooks he'd found at a garage sale for $3 each. He had no formal credentials. He had 17 years of building things that worked. He had also, 8 years before the divorce, spent 6 months in a rented studio space with a man named Marcus Webb, building the foundational patent architecture for what would become Apex Energy Solutions, a clean energy technology company that had taken years to build and was, in the fall of the year Jake moved into the garage, quietly preparing for the kind of announcement that gets covered in the business press. Jake was a co-founder. He was also, per the terms of a non-disclosure agreement, unable to say that to anyone outside of a small list of authorized parties. The NDA had been mutual, protective. There were real business reasons for it. Marcus had asked, and Jake had trusted him. And Jake did not break the agreements he made with people he trusted. So officially, Jake Mercer was unemployed. Officially, he lived in a garage. Officially, based on the home study filed with the family court, he was not a stable provider. He knew all of this. He sat with it. Some evenings he would sit on an overturned milk crate outside the garage door and watch the end of the street where the light went orange before dark. And he would hold the weight of how wrong the record was, and then he would go back inside and keep working. He had a laptop. He had a hotspot. He had the toolbox and several machines he had repaired or repurposed. He took jobs, small ones, under the table, fixing engines, rewiring circuits, diagnosing electrical failures in equipment that repair shops had given up on. He charged $60 an hour, sometimes $80 if the job was complicated. He built a small, quiet reputation in the industrial district on Loomis Street, where shop owners learned to call him before calling anyone else. He put $40 aside from every job, every single one. He wrote it down. The notebook now had 2 columns, the dates of Lily's visits and the money set aside. Both columns kept growing. Claire Dawson received the case file on a Wednesday morning in February. She was a custody evaluator with 7 years of experience and a caseload that regularly ran to 18 active files at once. She worked for a private firm contracted by the county family court. She was good at her job. She was also, as of that Wednesday, 34 years old, recently out of a relationship that had ended badly, and in the habit of making herself black coffee at 5:45 a.m. as a way of beginning the day before the day actually began. She opened the Mercer file. It was not a sympathetic document. The file described a male subject, 38, unemployed, residing at 1114 Ridgemont Avenue in a detached accessory structure. Source of income, unclear. Financial assets, under $3,000. Primary custodial parent had documented concerns regarding stability, consistent housing, and capacity for child care. A previous evaluator had noted significant limitations in the subject's ability to provide a normative environment, a phrase that Claire read twice, slowly, because it had the smooth quality of language produced by someone who had not looked at the subject very hard. She set the file down. She had read a lot of files. She had learned to listen for what they didn't say. This one was very loud about what it didn't say. She drove to Ridgemont Avenue on a Thursday morning without calling ahead. She knocked on the side door of the garage at 9:14 a.m. Jake opened it. He was in work clothes. There was grease on one forearm, and he was holding a circuit board in the other hand, the kind with small components soldered in careful rows. He looked at her badge, then at her face. "Ms. Dawson?" he said. Not a question. "Mr. Mercer, do you have a few minutes?" He stepped back. She stepped in. The garage was not what the file had prepared her for. It was organized. Methodically, almost obsessively organized. Tools sorted by type along one wall. A workbench with 3 different active projects laid out in stages, a shelf with labeled boxes, a folding cot in the corner with a wool blanket folded precisely at its foot. It smelled like machine oil and something faintly like coffee. On the wall above the workbench, someone had taped a drawing. A child's drawing, in crayon, a yellow house, a green tree, a figure with a big head and a tiny body labeled in large, uneven letters, Daddy. Claire did not react. She was trained not to react, but she registered it. "You want coffee?" Jake asked. He gestured toward a small machine on the bench's edge. "It's not good coffee. I want to be honest about that up front." Something in her chest shifted slightly. She said, "Sure." They sat on 2 folding chairs with paper cups between them, and she asked her questions. Jake answered them without embellishment and without evasion. He did not perform struggle. He did not perform dignity either. He simply answered what she asked. When she asked about his work, he said, "I fix things. Electrical mostly, some mechanical." "For who?" "Shops on Loomis. A couple of industrial clients. Word of mouth." "Do you have documentation of that income?" "I have a notebook," he said. She asked to see it. He handed it over without hesitation. She opened it to the first page. The 2 columns, the dates and the money. She scanned down, weeks, then months, then more months. "What's the left column?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Visits with my daughter," Jake said. She closed the notebook and handed it back. She looked at him for a moment. He held her gaze without flinching. Not combative, just present. "I'll be in touch," she said. She drove back through town. She sat at a red light on Mercer Avenue, different Mercer, she noted, and drummed 2 fingers against the steering wheel. She had a feeling she'd learned not to ignore, a specific tightening in her jaw that happened when something about a file did not line up with what she'd just seen. She started pulling the thread. It took Claire 11 days. She was thorough. She had a contact at the county patent office, a man named Gus who owed her a favor from a case 2 years ago, and she called him on a Tuesday afternoon and asked him to run a name. Gus called back in 40 minutes. "Jake Mercer," he said, and she could hear him clicking through screens. "Yeah, Claire, this guy has 14 filed patents. Energy systems mostly. Electrical integration. A couple of thermal transfer designs. Some of these aren't minor. This one here has 3 active licensing agreements." She wrote it down. She spent the next 4 days following a thread that wound through a filing with the Delaware Secretary of State, a company registration document from 2017, a co-founder agreement, and finally, a quarterly filing with 2 names attached. One was Marcus Webb. One was Jake Mercer. She read the company name at the top of the filing. Then she put the paper down on her kitchen table at 11:30 on a Friday night and sat very still. Apex Energy Solutions. She had heard that name. In the last 6 weeks, she had heard that name twice on the radio in the car and once on a podcast she'd had playing while making dinner. It was one of those companies that was being talked about in a specific way, the way that meant something was about to happen. She went back through the file, the previous evaluator's notes, the characterization of Jake as unstable, unsupported, unable to provide, the language about normative environment. She pulled up the evaluator's firm and ran the name. It was a small firm, 2 staff members. She ran both names. One of them had received a charitable donation of $12,000 in November from a private foundation. She ran the foundation. It was controlled by a holding company. She ran the holding company. The name at the top of the holding company was Brad Keller. She knew that name. Brad Keller was a real estate developer based in the city, well-connected, profiled in a regional business magazine the previous spring. The profile had included a photograph of Brad at a charity gala. Standing beside him, her hand on his arm, was a woman named Diane Holloway, Jake's ex-wife. Claire sat with this for a long time. Then she picked up her notebook and began writing. She met with a source, a paralegal at a family law firm who had seen the shape of this before, on a Sunday morning at a coffee shop on West 4th Street. She laid out what she had. The paralegal listened. She was a woman in her 50s named Roberta, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the manner of someone who had seen things. She read Claire's notes. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "When were the divorce papers filed?" "March 2022, Claire said. Roberta tapped the page. "And when was the Apex incorporation?" 2017. "And the patent filings?" "Starting 2018. Roberta folded her hands on the table. "So by 2021, she said, anyone doing basic research would have known those patents were going to be worth something significant. You get patents, you incorporate, you start licensing. The revenue curve on a company like that is predictable within a range. Someone who knew what she was looking at would have known," Claire said. "Or been told," Roberta said. The shape of it was this. Sometime before the divorce, Diane had learned, through Brad Keller or through her own research or through both, that Jake's intellectual property and equity position in Apex were on the verge of becoming enormously valuable. The timing of the divorce filing was not coincidental. The settlement terms, stripping Jake of assets, establishing him as the lesser financial partner, securing primary custody, were designed to achieve two things simultaneously. First, to ensure that Jake's equity could not be claimed as marital property if Apex's value became public. Second, to remove Lily from his daily life entirely, which was its own kind of leverage. The custody arrangement was not incidental to the scheme. It was central to it. Claire drove home. She sat in her car in the parking lot for a while. She thought about the two-column notebook, the dates of visits, the money set aside. She thought about a man sitting on a milk crate, watching the street go orange at the end of the day, knowing that the record was wrong, and not breaking the one agreement that would have fixed it. 3 weeks before the court date, a woman named Patricia Holloway called the family court's case intake line and left a message asking to speak with someone involved in the Mercer custody evaluation. The call was routed to Claire. They met in person at Patricia's home, a neat house in the suburb of Crestwood, with a garden that had been put to bed for winter. Patricia was 67 and walked with a cane and had the specific posture of a person who had been carrying something too long. She offered tea. Claire accepted. They sat at a kitchen table covered in a floral cloth. "I want you to know," Patricia said, "that this is the hardest thing I have done." She set a folder on the table. Inside, a series of screenshots of text messages, printed and dated. A journal entry, written by hand in her daughter's handwriting, from 2020. A series of emails between Diane and a private attorney, not Howard, not anyone on record in the case, discussing asset strategy. In one email from March 2021, Diane had written, "He won't say anything because of the NDA, and he won't break it because that's just how he is. So as long as the announcement doesn't happen before we finalize, we're fine." Claire read it twice. She looked at Patricia. "Why are you doing this?" Patricia set down her tea. She was quiet for a moment. "Because my granddaughter," she said, "deserves to know her father." She picked the cup back up. "And because I know what kind of man Jake Mercer is. And I know what kind of man Brad Keller is. And I am tired of knowing the difference and doing nothing." Claire gathered the documents carefully. She held the folder with both hands on the drive back, as if it were something fragile. Claire's supervising partner at the firm was a man named Dennis who had built the practice over 20 years and was protective of it in the specific way of someone who had invested everything in one thing. She told him what she had found on a Monday morning. He listened without interrupting. He was good at that. When she finished, he took off his glasses, set them on the desk, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Claire," he said. "I know," she said. "If we file an amended report, it will contradict the previous evaluator's assessment, which was submitted by the firm under contract. I know, Dennis. The Holloway attorney will file a complaint. Probably. Our contract with the county." "I know." He was quiet. He looked at her. She looked back. She had worked for him for 6 years. He knew what her face looked like when she had made a decision. He picked his glasses back up. "Write the report," he said. "Get the evidence documented. Make it airtight." She worked for 3 days straight. She slept 4 hours each night. She ate whatever was near her. On the third morning, she submitted the amended evaluation to the court. 18 pages, fully sourced, attaching Patricia's documents as exhibits. She sent the notification email, closed her laptop, and sat at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold. Her hands were shaking slightly around the mug. She let them shake. Jake found out about the report from his attorney, not Howard, who had retired, but a younger woman named Priya, who had picked up the case 3 months ago and read the files on a Saturday, and called him Sunday morning and said, "Jake, something changed." He listened while Priya explained what Claire had found. He sat on the folding chair by his workbench with the phone pressed to his ear. He did not say anything for a long moment. "Jake?" Priya said. "I'm here," he said. "This is good," she said. "This is really... Jake, this is good." He exhaled. Not a sigh, something more like a pressure releasing. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, okay." The night before the hearing, he sat outside the garage on the milk crate. The street was quiet. Someone had a porch light on 3 houses down. The air was cold, but not bitter yet. He thought about Marcus. He thought about the NDA. He thought about Lily's face in that room on Delwood Road, the way she had pressed herself into his side. He thought about a man's father, his own father, who had owned this toolbox, who had worked his entire life for hourly wages and come home with grease on his hands and never once mentioned being tired, who had said once, when Jake was 12 and angry about something he could no longer remember, "You keep your word, no matter what, because when you have nothing left, your word is what tells people who you are." He had kept his word. The announcement from Apex Energy Solutions went live at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, 4 hours before the court hearing. A $4.3 billion merger with a European clean energy consortium. Forbes had the story. Bloomberg had the story. The regional paper had it by 7:30. Jake had known it was coming. He had not known the exact date. That was deliberate, Marcus had told him, to prevent any conflict with the legal proceedings. He made his coffee. He put on the cleanest shirt he had. He got in the truck. The hearing was scheduled for 11 a.m. in courtroom 4 of the Harfield County Family Court Building on Grant Street. By 10:40, the gallery was more crowded than it should have been for a custody hearing. Someone had connected the dots, a name in the Apex filing, a docket number, a courthouse location, and posted it online at 8 a.m. Some of the people in the gallery were media. Some were curious. Some were neighbors who had simply heard and come. Jake walked in at 10:52 in a gray work shirt and clean jeans. Someone in the gallery recognized him, or thought they did. A murmur moved through the room like a wave. Diane sat at the plaintiff's table in a cream blazer. Beside her, an attorney in a suit that cost more than Jake's monthly rent. She did not look at Jake. Brad Keller was in the gallery, 3rd row. He had the look of a man who had calculated odds and was still confident in them. The judge, the Honorable Sandra Reyes, came in at 11:03. She had read the amended evaluation. She had read the exhibits. Her expression gave away very little, but Claire, who had taken a seat in the gallery and was watching, noticed that when Judge Reyes looked down at the file, she kept it open longer than usual. Priya opened the case. She was composed and precise. She laid out the timeline, the patents, the incorporation, the NDA, the divorce filing date, the chain of documents Claire had traced, Patricia's testimony. She did not editorialize. She let the sequence speak. Diane's attorney objected, multiple times. Judge Reyes sustained some and overruled others. The room was very quiet. Then Priya said, "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into the record a document that was made public this morning." She held up a printed page. The Forbes story, the Apex Energy Solutions merger. At the top, in the small header section that listed company founders and key executives, Jake T. Mercer, co-founder. The room reacted. It was not loud. It was the kind of reaction that happens in a small space when many people understand something at the same time. A sharp, collective intake, a shifting, a murmuring that Judge Reyes had to quiet with one raised hand. Brad Keller's jaw tightened. He looked for the first time like someone whose calculation had been wrong. Diane did not move. Jake sat at the table with his hands flat, the same way he had come in. He was looking at the middle distance, not at Diane, not at the gallery, somewhere past all of it. Diane Holloway had been intelligent. That was the thing no one wanted to say, but everyone who had known her understood. She had been strategic. She had seen the shape of what Jake was building before many people did, and she had made a decision. Not out of desperation, not out of anger, but out of a cold, careful calculus about what she wanted and what she could take. She had not counted on his mother. She had not counted on Patricia, sitting at that kitchen table with a folder and a decision she had been building toward for 3 years. She had not counted on Claire Dawson. And she had not counted on the fact that Brad Keller, as it turned out, had a paper trail that was far less careful than his public image suggested. The exhibits were entered. The emails were read into the record. Patricia testified by phone, her voice clear and steady. When Diane's attorney tried to characterize the messages as taken out of context, Judge Reyes asked, "In what context would this email be interpreted differently?" No one answered. Judge Reyes recessed at 1:15 and returned at 2:40. The courtroom had not emptied. If anything, it was fuller. She settled her glasses, looked down at her notes, and began. She noted first that the initial custody evaluation contained characterizations that were inconsistent with documented evidence. She noted the financial relationship between the previous evaluator's associated firm and a foundation controlled by Brad Keller. She noted the sequence of events surrounding the divorce filing and the timeline of the patent licensing activity. She noted Jake's income, modest, earned by hand, documented in a handwritten notebook. And she noted, without editorial, that he had maintained every scheduled visit with his daughter and had not missed a single one. She awarded shared physical custody, equal residential time, beginning the following Friday. She also referred the matter to the county's Family Court Oversight Office for review of the original proceedings and noted that she was forwarding the exhibits regarding the previous evaluator to the state licensing board. Brad Keller left the gallery before the ruling was finished. He did not get far. There were journalists outside. Diane sat very still through the reading of the ruling. Then she stood, slowly, and gathered her things. She did not look at Jake. She walked out the side door, and that was the last time most people in that room saw her for a long time. Jake stood in the hallway outside courtroom 4 after it was over. Priya was beside him, going through papers, saying things he was nodding to but not fully hearing. Claire came out through the side door. She stopped a few feet from him. She was still in her coat from the morning. She looked like she had not slept in several days, which was accurate. Jake looked at her. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head. She started. "I read the notebook, the one with the columns." He didn't say anything. "Nobody keeps a record like that," she said, "unless there's someone who is paying attention." Who was... She stopped. That's what the file kept missing. Someone had been paying attention to their kid that whole time. He nodded once. She said, "I hope Friday goes well." "It will," he said. She believed him. The thing that surprised people, the reporters, the people who found the story online, the ones who asked for comment or an interview or a quote, was that Jake did not move. He stayed in the garage on Ridgemont Avenue. He had the means by then to live anywhere. Marcus called him the afternoon of the ruling and said, among other things, "Jake, man, you can do anything you want now." Jake had said, "I know," and then he'd gone back inside. He cleaned the garage. He built a second workbench. He installed a small heater for winter and a better light on the cord. He put up shelves and put Lily's drawing in a frame, the yellow house, the green tree, the big-headed figure with the uneven letters. He built a loft bed above the workbench for when Lily stayed over on his weeks. She chose the blanket for it herself at a store on Market Street, green with small white stars. The first night she slept in it, she climbed up and looked down at him from the edge. "It smells like your garage," she said. "It is my garage," he said. "I know," she said. "I like it." He turned off the main light. He left the small lamp on. He sat in his chair below and listened to her breathe in the dark above him. And for the first time in 3 years, the notebook with the 2 columns felt like something he did not need to keep adding to. He didn't stop. He kept writing the dates of every visit. He just stopped counting what it cost him to show up. She got the complaint, as expected. Dennis handled it with the composure of someone who had decided ahead of time that the right thing was worth the cost. The complaint went to the state licensing board. The board reviewed it. 3 months later, they issued a determination. No finding against Claire Dawson. They also cited irregularities in the previous evaluator's report and opened a separate inquiry. She went back to her caseload. 18 active files. Black coffee at 5:45 a.m. She saw Jake again in February at a community meeting about a proposed development project on the east side of town. He was there because one of the Loomis Street shop owners had asked him to come and speak to an electrical infrastructure question. She was there because she had grown up on the east side and showed up to things that mattered to her neighborhood. They said hello in the parking lot after. They talked for 15 minutes. She learned that he had been admitted to Harfield Community College's engineering program, not because he needed the credential, but because, as he put it, "I want to know how to say the things I know how to do." She told him about the licensing board determination. He said, "Good, that matters." She said, "Yeah." The street light in the parking lot was orange, and the air smelled like rain coming. He said he had to get back. She said she did too. He said, "Same time next month, maybe." She looked at him. "The meetings are monthly," she said. "So, yeah." He smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile. Something about it rearranged the shape of the evening slightly. She drove home and made tea and sat at her kitchen table, not doing anything in particular. Brad Keller did not survive the public attention. The email trail was too specific. The financial connection to the previous evaluator's firm was too documented. 3 business partners withdrew publicly within a month of the story breaking. A feature in a national real estate publication called it a case study in reputational collapse. His development project stalled. His social media went quiet and then went dark. He had built his life around appearances. He had bet everything on a record that could be controlled. When the record changed, there was nothing underneath. Diane settled into a smaller life. She did not speak publicly. She did not contest the revised custody arrangements when they went to final order. She was, by every account, no longer the woman who had walked into the courtroom in a cream blazer. Something had shifted in her that she kept to herself. Lily noticed, on the weekends she spent with her mother, that her mother was quieter now. Quieter and, she told Jake one evening in the garage, when they were eating takeout noodles and she was 7 going on 40, More real, I think. Like she stopped putting a face on. Jake set down his fork. "That can happen," he said carefully. "Is it bad?" Lily asked. He thought about it. "No," he said. "Sometimes it's the beginning of something better." Lily considered this with the serious expression she used when something mattered to her. Then she picked up her fork again and said, "Okay." In the spring of the year that followed, a journalist from a regional magazine profiled Jake Mercer. She came to the garage on Ridgemont Avenue on a Tuesday afternoon with a photographer. The photographer took pictures of the workbench, the shelves, the framed drawing, the green-starred blanket visible above the loft edge. The journalist asked the question that everyone who had followed the story wanted answered. You could have said something about Apex, about who you were. At any point in those 3 years, one sentence would have changed everything. Why didn't you? Jake was quiet for a moment. He was turning a small component in his hands. Habit, she would write later, a way of thinking. "Because I made an agreement," he said, "and breaking it wouldn't have made me the person I was trying to be for my kid." She wrote that down. Then she asked, "Was it worth it?" He looked over at the framed drawing. The yellow house, the green tree, the figure with the big head and the small body and the uneven letters spelling out Daddy. "She drew that when she was 5, he said, 2 years before any of this started. She drew it and gave it to me at a school event, and I put it in my truck and kept it there for 7 years. He paused. "Even when the truck was the only thing I had left." He set the component down. "Yeah," he said, "it was worth it." If this story moved you in any way, drop a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. Stories like this deserve to be heard, and your words are what keep us going. If you believe in quiet courage, in people who hold the line when it costs them everything, hit like and subscribe, and turn on notifications. We find these stories so you don't have to look alone. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring enough to stay until the end. That matters more than you know. This story follows Marcus Webb, a brilliant black toxicologist whose life was destroyed after he tried to expose dangerous research misconduct at a pharmaceutical institute. Once respected as Dr. Marcus Webb, he lost everything: his career, reputation, home, and marriage, after powerful people discredited his findings. Years later, he works quietly as a hospital janitor while raising his 7-year-old daughter, Maya, in a small but carefully organized apartment. Though the world now sees him as invisible, Marcus never stopped being a scientist. At the same hospital, 9-year-old Chloe Sterling, daughter of powerful CEO Eleanor Sterling, lies unconscious with a mysterious illness no doctor can explain. 18 specialists have failed to find a diagnosis. Eleanor, a woman used to controlling every outcome through power and money, watches helplessly as her daughter fades away. While cleaning the hospital at night, Marcus notices something strange outside Chloe's room: the faint chemical scent of DMSO, a compound he recognizes instantly from his toxicology background. His instincts tell him something is terribly wrong. Quietly, he begins observing patterns, documenting dates, tracking medical staff rotations, and recording chemical traces in a notebook. The evidence points toward a horrifying possibility. Someone is poisoning Chloe. The more Marcus investigates, the more suspicion centers around Dr. Thorne, Chloe's trusted physician. Thorne appears compassionate, ethical, and devoted, exactly the kind of man no one would question. But Marcus discovers a disturbing connection between Thorne's hospital shifts and Chloe's worsening condition. Behind the scenes, Thorne is secretly involved in a financial conspiracy tied to Sterling Corp stock manipulation, where Chloe's death would trigger massive profits through a carefully timed short sale. Marcus desperately tries to warn Eleanor, but his past and appearance work against him. His PTSD causes his explanation to come out fragmented, and Eleanor sees only an unstable janitor approaching her daughter's room. Security removes him, and he is fired from the hospital for suspicious behavior. Most people would stop there. Marcus does not. Working from a makeshift laboratory beneath his apartment, he uses his remaining scientific skills to create a diagnostic reagent capable of exposing the toxin. Knowing time is running out, he risks everything by returning to the hospital one final night. Inside Chloe's room, Marcus interrupts Thorne just as the doctor prepares another injection. Security tackles Marcus, and once again he looks like the villain. But before being restrained, he asks Eleanor to take a blue vial from his jacket and test the liquid Thorne dropped. She hesitates, torn between the trusted doctor and the disgraced janitor. Then she remembers the look Marcus gave her days earlier, not threatening, but urgent. A look of someone trying to stop something terrible. She trusts him. The moment the reagent touches the liquid, it turns deep purple-black, undeniable proof of poisoning. The truth finally surfaces. Police discover financial records and evidence of a massive conspiracy involving Thorne and an investment group seeking profit from Eleanor's tragedy. Chloe survives. The toxin is identified, treatment begins, and her recovery slowly starts. But the greatest healing happens outside the ICU. Eleanor realizes how easily she judged Marcus based on fear, status, and appearances. Instead of offering money or empty apologies, she visits his apartment and begins again, not with power, but with honesty. The story closes with hope. Marcus is restored to the scientific world as director of toxicology at Sterling Corp's new research lab. Yet he keeps his old custodial badge beside his new ID card, a reminder of who he was, what he survived, and the price of being ignored. Nearby sits a photograph of Chloe and Maya laughing together, proof that compassion can bridge worlds adults often divide. This story reminds us that truth does not become less true simply because the wrong person speaks it. Marcus lost credibility in society's eyes, but his knowledge, integrity, and purpose never disappeared. Sometimes the world dismisses people not because they are wrong, but because listening to them is inconvenient. The story also shows that appearances can be dangerously misleading. Dr. Thorne looked trustworthy, while Marcus looked suspicious. Yet goodness and evil rarely announce themselves clearly. Real judgment requires patience and humility. Another powerful lesson is that expertise and identity are not the same as social status. Marcus remained a scientist even while pushing a cleaning cart. Titles may disappear, but skill, character, and conviction endure. Finally, the story teaches that redemption and trust are possible. Eleanor learns to dismantle her assumptions, Marcus reclaims his place in the world, and Chloe's survival becomes more than a medical victory. It becomes proof that believing in the overlooked can save lives. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories about resilience, justice, and second chances. And tell us in the comments, would you have trusted Marcus in that hospital room? Sometimes one decision changes everything, and your answer might reveal more than you think. This story follows Marcus Webb, a brilliant black toxicologist whose life was destroyed after he tried to expose dangerous research misconduct at a pharmaceutical institute. Once respected as Dr. Marcus Webb, he lost everything: his career, reputation, home, and marriage, after powerful people discredited his findings. Years later, he works quietly as a hospital janitor while raising his 7-year-old daughter, Maya, in a small but carefully organized apartment. Though the world now sees him as invisible, Marcus never stopped being a scientist. At the same hospital, 9-year-old Chloe Sterling, daughter of powerful CEO Eleanor Sterling, lies unconscious with a mysterious illness no doctor can explain. 18 specialists have failed to find a diagnosis. Eleanor, a woman used to controlling every outcome through power and money, watches helplessly as her daughter fades away. While cleaning the hospital at night, Marcus notices something strange outside Chloe's room: the faint chemical scent of DMSO, a compound he recognizes instantly from his toxicology background. His instincts tell him something is terribly wrong. Quietly, he begins observing patterns, documenting dates, tracking medical staff rotations, and recording chemical traces in a notebook. The evidence points toward a horrifying possibility. Someone is poisoning Chloe. The more Marcus investigates, the more suspicion centers around Dr. Thorne, Chloe's trusted physician. Thorne appears compassionate, ethical, and devoted, exactly the kind of man no one would question. But Marcus discovers a disturbing connection between Thorne's hospital shifts and Chloe's worsening condition. Behind the scenes, Thorne is secretly involved in a financial conspiracy tied to Sterling Corp stock manipulation, where Chloe's death would trigger massive profits through a carefully timed short sale. Marcus desperately tries to warn Eleanor, but his past and appearance work against him. His PTSD causes his explanation to come out fragmented, and Eleanor sees only an unstable janitor approaching her daughter's room. Security removes him, and he is fired from the hospital for suspicious behavior. Most people would stop there. Marcus does not. Working from a makeshift laboratory beneath his apartment, he uses his remaining scientific skills to create a diagnostic reagent capable of exposing the toxin. Knowing time is running out, he risks everything by returning to the hospital one final night. Inside Chloe's room, Marcus interrupts Thorne just as the doctor prepares another injection. Security tackles Marcus, and once again he looks like the villain. But before being restrained, he asks Eleanor to take a blue vial from his jacket and test the liquid Thorne dropped. She hesitates, torn between the trusted doctor and the disgraced janitor. Then she remembers the look Marcus gave her days earlier, not threatening, but urgent. A look of someone trying to stop something terrible. She trusts him. The moment the reagent touches the liquid, it turns deep purple-black, undeniable proof of poisoning. The truth finally surfaces. Police discover financial records and evidence of a massive conspiracy involving Thorne and an investment group seeking profit from Eleanor's tragedy. Chloe survives. The toxin is identified, treatment begins, and her recovery slowly starts. But the greatest healing happens outside the ICU. Eleanor realizes how easily she judged Marcus based on fear, status, and appearances. Instead of offering money or empty apologies, she visits his apartment and begins again, not with power, but with honesty. The story closes with hope. Marcus is restored to the scientific world as director of toxicology at Sterling Corp's new research lab. Yet he keeps his old custodial badge beside his new ID card, a reminder of who he was, what he survived, and the price of being ignored. Nearby sits a photograph of Chloe and Maya laughing together, proof that compassion can bridge worlds adults often divide. This story reminds us that truth does not become less true simply because the wrong person speaks it. Marcus lost credibility in society's eyes, but his knowledge, integrity, and purpose never disappeared. Sometimes the world dismisses people not because they are wrong, but because listening to them is inconvenient. The story also shows that appearances can be dangerously misleading. Dr. Thorne looked trustworthy, while Marcus looked suspicious. Yet goodness and evil rarely announce themselves clearly. Real judgment requires patience and humility. Another powerful lesson is that expertise and identity are not the same as social status. Marcus remained a scientist even while pushing a cleaning cart. Titles may disappear, but skill, character, and conviction endure. Finally, the story teaches that redemption and trust are possible. Eleanor learns to dismantle her assumptions, Marcus reclaims his place in the world, and Chloe's survival becomes more than a medical victory. It becomes proof that believing in the overlooked can save lives. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories about resilience, justice, and second chances. And tell us in the comments, would you have trusted Marcus in that hospital room? Sometimes one decision changes everything, and your answer might reveal more than you think.